want you to just take a second and try to imagine mentally processing a concept that is so massive, like, so completely counter to your everyday experience of reality, that it literally gives you a physical headache.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right. I mean, maybe you're staring up at a perfectly clear night sky out away from the city lights, and you were trying to genuinely picture what is, behind the edge of the expanding universe.
That'll do it.
Or you're reading some quantum physics piece that suggests time doesn't actually exist in a linear way, and you just hit this rigid, immovable limit of your own comprehension.
Like hitting a brick wall.
Exactly. Your brain just throws up this file too large error message, and you can actually feel the cognitive strain of your neurons trying to bridge a gap they really weren't designed to cross.
Well, and that physical sensation, that's literally your cognitive framework actively failing.
Wow, actively failing.
Yeah. I mean, the mental models you use to navigate your daily life, like where objects have defined edges, where cause always precedes effect, where 1 + 1 = 2, those models suddenly encounter a data set that just refuses to play by those rules.
It just rejects the premise.
Right. And the friction between your finite framework and an infinite concept, that's what creates that mental wall.
And that friction is really the core of our mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at a really short but, incredibly profound text by a pastoral clinical counselor named Friar John Baptist.
Yeah, it's titled The Trinity, Connected to the Ocean of God.
And the subject matter here, the Holy Trinity, that is arguably one of the most famous file too large errors in human history.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just from a purely mathematical and logical standpoint, the concept of the Trinity is basically designed to break human logic.
It really is.
Because you're dealing with the assertion of three distinct, fully realized persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that simultaneously exist as one single, undivided entity.
It's not a pie cut into 3 slices.
Exactly, no. It's like 3 complete pies that are somehow also just one pie. And for centuries, theologians, philosophers, they've all tried to build this intellectual scaffolding to support the idea.
And how did that go?
Well, practically all of them have hit that exact cognitive wall we were just talking about.
Which brings us to a really legendary story that just perfectly captures the sheer agony of hitting that wall.
I love this story.
It's so good. So the friar's text anchors its whole perspective in this ancient narrative that was detailed in a 2019 piece on medievalists.net. And it centers on St. Augustine of Hippo.
A very heavy hitter.
Yeah, we are talking about a man who was arguably one of the most formidable intellectuals of the late Roman world. A brilliant philosopher, a master rhetorician, and someone fundamentally driven by this intense need to categorize and define and, master knowledge.
So according to the legend, Augustine is walking along the seashore, and he is just in a state of absolute intellectual torment.
Just pacing the sand.
Right. Pacing the sand, agonizing over this massive treatise he's writing on the Trinity. He's twisting his mind into knots, trying to map out the exact mechanics of the divine.
Like he's treating God like the ultimate physics problem that just needs the right equation to be solved.
Yes, exactly. He's trying to solve it.
To put Augustine's struggle into a modern context for you listening, it isn't just that he's trying to, say, download the entire modern internet onto a dusty, ancient floppy disk from the 1990s.
That's a great analogy.
Right, like the hardware limitation is super obvious there. But the real issue is that if you actually attempted that transfer, the drive's processor would literally overheat and melt just trying to parse the incoming metadata.
It would just catch fire.
Exactly. Augustine's brain is melting on that beach. And as he is pacing, he comes across a child.
Yeah, and this child has dug a tiny little hole in the sand. And he's running back and forth to the surf with a small shell, scooping up the ocean water and running back to pour it into the little hole.
And Augustine just can't help himself.
Of course not. Augustine, ever the logical philosopher, stops and just points out the obvious flaw in the kid's operation.
He's like, what are you doing?
Right. He tells the boy that his task is physically impossible. The ocean is unimaginably vast and the hole is incredibly small. The volume of the sea is never going to fit into that tiny recess in the sand.
And this is where the legend delivers this massive punchline.
It's so good.
The child looks up at this great philosopher and flips the script entirely. He tells Augustine that it is equally impossible for a limited human mind to contain the infinite triune God.
Ooh.
Right. Just drops the mic.
And then the child vanishes, revealing himself as a divine messenger, and basically leaves Augustine alone on the beach with a totally shattered worldview.
Mind completely blown.
Yeah. And Friar John Baptist uses this moment to diagnose a fundamental human flaw. Because Augustine's mistake wasn't just that he was using the wrong formula, he was using the entirely wrong paradigm.
He was treating the divine like a problem to be figured out.
Yeah. Exactly. The friar writes that the Trinity, and really by extension any encounter with the infinite, is, quote, not a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be entered.
And I think the psychological distinction between a puzzle and a mystery is super crucial here. Like, think about why human beings are so drawn to puzzles.
We love them.
We do. Whether it's a jigsaw puzzle, a Sudoku, or, a complex engineering problem at work, puzzles appeal to our biological drive for control.
Oh, totally.
A puzzle has a finite number of pieces. It has defined borders, and it has guaranteed solution. When you solve it, you get this huge rush of dopamine. You master it, you put it back in the box, and you own the outcome. It's basically an exercise in dominance.
That is exactly it. And a mystery, at least is defined in this theological context, is fundamentally hostile to the concept of dominance.
How so?
Well, the friar describes the divine not as this static object that you could just analyze, but as a communion of love that actively invites us in.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, a mystery doesn't ask you to stand above it and arrange its pieces.
Nah.
It asks you to step inside it.
To participate.
Yes, it demands participation rather than mastery.
Mm-hmm.
When you treat a mystery like a puzzle, you trigger that exact cognitive friction we were talking about earlier.
So Augustine's headache was basically the result of trying to dominate something that is, by definition, meant to envelop him.
Precisely.
But, there is a really dangerous trap in this realization, because if you are standing on that beach and you suddenly understand that your bucket is infinitely too small and the ocean is never, ever going to fit.
Natural response is to just give up.
Right. The natural human response is nihilism. Like, if I can't understand it, why even try? You just drop the bucket and walk away from the beach entirely.
Right. It's a totally defeating feeling.
So how do we engage with vastness without just throwing our hands up in defeat?
Well, this is where Friar John Baptist introduces this incredibly elegant engineering solution to the metaphor.
Okay, I'm listening.
We've established that you cannot pour the ocean into the hole. The volume disparity is absolute. It's a fact. However, you can dig a small canal.
A canal?
Yeah. You can carve a trench in the sand that connects your tiny hole to the vastness of the sea.
Okay, I actually have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Because digging a canal to let a tiny trickle of water into a hole in the sand, that sounds a whole lot like giving up. It sounds like you're just settling for a tiny puddle because you're too intimidated by the ocean. Like, how does the friar justify that as a victory?
That's a fair question, but it's a victory because the ultimate goal shifts from acquisition to relationship.
Okay, unpack that for me.
The canal isn't a surrender. It's a profound realignment of purpose. See, when the hole is isolated and you're frantically trying to carry buckets of water to it, the water you do manage to capture eventually goes stagnant anyway.
Because you're just hoarding it.
Exactly, you're hoarding knowledge. But when you dig the canal, the hole still doesn't contain the ocean. The ocean is still vast and the hole is still small, but it is no longer separated from it.
Oh, I see.
Right. Fresh water flows in and out with the tide. The text actually notes specifically that the hole remains alive because it remains connected.
That's beautiful. So the objective of the human mind isn't storage capacity, it's maintaining conductivity.
Conductivity, exactly. And the friar doesn't leave this as just some abstract concept. He maps out the specific mechanics of this flow.
What does that look like in practice?
He details 4 distinct inflows that act as that fresh water entering from the ocean of divine life into the small shore of our human experience.
And what are they?
They are every prayer, every act of love, every moment of silence, and every experience of forgiveness.
Okay, looking at that list, the one that really strikes me is the inclusion of every moment of silence.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Because if we map that back onto our floppy disk analogy, silence isn't just the absence of background noise, it is actively pausing the processor.
Right, you're stopping the download.
Exactly. It's the intentional choice to stop trying to parse all that infinite metadata. By choosing silence, you stop trying to solve the puzzle, which then creates the actual space for the mystery to enter.
Yeah, silence essentially clears the sand out of the canal. And psychologically speaking, when you sit in intentional silence, you're quieting the ego.
Because the ego always wants to solve it.
Right. The ego is the part of your mind that is constantly demanding control and definition and mastery over your environment,
Always building a bigger bucket.
always. But by silencing that demand, you allow your sensory and emotional pathways to experience the vastness without needing to categorize it.
Hmm.
You're experiencing the flow rather than trying to trap the water.
You know, the really profound thing here is that this dynamic, this idea of surrendering the need to control vastness,
Hmm.
it actually has a highly specific, measurable mechanism in human psychology.
It really does. It's not just poetic.
No, this isn't just some theological metaphor for spiritual seekers. This is literally how the human brain actually processes the infinite.
Yeah, the source text builds this brilliant bridge over to modern behavioral science. It specifically cites the landmark 2003 research by psychologists Datcher Keltner and Jonathan Haidt.
They're absolute pioneers in the study of human emotion.
They are. And their 2003 paper essentially put the emotion of awe on the scientific map.
Because before their work, awe was often just kind of lumped in with fear or surprise, right?
Yeah, it didn't really have its own distinct category. But Keltner and Haidt isolated it as a unique, incredibly complex emotional state. And they defined it by two central mandatory appraisals that absolutely have to happen in the brain.
Let's walk through those. What's the first one?
So the first appraisal is the perception of vastness.
Meaning things that are just huge.
Right, but it can be physical vastness, like standing on the very edge of the Grand Canyon, or it can be conceptual vastness, like grappling with the paradox of the Trinity, or trying to understand the scale of the cosmos.
So the subject encounters something that completely dwarfs their normal frame of reference.
Exactly, that's the first step.
And the second appraisal is where the headache happens, right?
Yes. They call it a need for accommodation.
Okay, accommodation. Break that down for us.
This relies on a psychological concept called schemas. Schemas are basically the mental filing cabinets we use to organize our understanding of the world.
The folders on our desktop?
Sure, folders on a desktop. But when you encounter something vastly outside your everyday experience, your current schemas fail. The new information just doesn't fit into the existing files.
So what does the brain do?
Well, your brain has a choice. It can reject the information entirely, which leads to confusion or fear or that file too large headache.
Right.
Or it can engage in accommodation, meaning it can actively alter its own internal structures to make room for the new reality.
Oh, wow. So awe isn't just a fleeting feeling of like, oh, wow, look at that. It is the actual physical, neurological process of your worldview expanding.
Yes. And Keltner and Haidt found that when people successfully accommodate vastness, their physiology literally changes.
Really?
Well, the parasympathetic nervous system engages. Heart rates actually slow down. The whole fight or flight response just drops off.
That's incredible.
They even observe something they call the small self effect, where the brain's default mode network, which is the area responsible for ego and self-referential thought, that area actually quiets down.
So people experiencing awe report feeling, what, less important?
Less important, yes, but simultaneously much more connected to everything around them. Their personal boundaries blur.
You know, that casts the whole Augustan legend in a completely different light for me.
How so?
Well, if awe is the process of forced accommodation through vastness, then that child on the beach isn't just, pointing out a logical flaw in Augustine's math.
Yeah.
The child is initiating a literal awe intervention.
Oh, I love that phrasing. An awe intervention.
Right. He is trying to force Augustine's brain to stop panicking over the broken schema of this puzzle and instead to actually accommodate the reality of the mystery.
Yes. And Keltner and Haidt emphasize that awe has this dual nature. It humbles us, but it also opens us.
It humbles us because we realize how small the bucket is.
Exactly. It humbles us because the perception of vastness brutally exposes our limitations.
Yeah.
It proves that reality is fundamentally larger than our capacity to control it. You literally cannot command the ocean.
But the opening part.
But the opening part, the moment you accept that limitation, the need for accommodation opens you. It shifts your focus completely away from your own frustrating inability to build a bigger bucket. It allows you to just simply appreciate the majesty of the water.
So digging the canal, that is basically the behavioral expression of awe.
It is the daily lived practice of it. Friar John Baptist recognizes that the Trinity invites exactly this kind of psychological transformation.
It's not a test.
No, the doctrine isn't meant to be a test of your intellectual endurance. It's meant to induce awe. It's meant to shrink your ego and connect you to the broader communion of love.
Which echoes the science again.
Right, because evolutionary biologists point out that awe actually evolved in humans to promote social cohesion.
Because if we feel small, we need each other.
Exactly. By making us feel small, it makes us realize our reliance on the collective. And in the theological sense, it makes us realize our reliance on the divine flow.
So when we pull all this together, when we strip away the medieval legends and the academic psychology terms, what is the core mandate for you listening to this right now?
It's a great question.
Because whether your worldview is rooted in a spiritual pursuit of the divine, or maybe it's just a secular fascination with the mechanics of human cognition,
Oh,
the lesson here converges perfectly.
completely perfectly.
You do not need to empty the universe into your mind. You don't have to decode the ultimate puzzle of existence to have a valid, meaningful place within it. Your primary responsibility is simply to keep your canal open.
It really is a radical call to relinquish mastery. I
Yeah.
mean, we live in a culture that heavily incentivizes building bigger buckets.
Oh, constant upgrades.
Right. We are completely obsessed with optimization, with gathering more data, with upgrading the processor so we can finally parse the infinite metadata of our lives.
But this text, which is completely supported by cognitive science, suggests that this approach is inherently doomed.
It's going to end in a headache.
Every time.
The far healthier, far more awe-inspiring approach is to just acknowledge the limits of your hardware. You cannot contain the vastness, but you can maintain a sustainable, life-giving connection to it by digging the trench and clearing out the sand.
We spend so much time just banging our heads against the wall, furious that the ocean won't fit in the hole.
We really do.
But, I want to leave you with one final thread to pull on regarding those 4 inflows that Fryer mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, because we talked about prayer and acts of love, and obviously we dug deep into the neurological quiet of silence. But the final inflow he lists is an experience of forgiveness.
The hardest one, probably.
Definitely. Now, consider everything Keltner and Haidt just taught us about awe. That it requires an encounter with a vastness that shatters our current mental schemas and forces us to accommodate an entirely new reality.
Right.
If that is true, then maybe the most awe-inspiring thing you can ever encounter isn't a literal ocean or a black hole or a complex piece of theology.
What is it then?
Maybe the true vastness is the quiet, agonizing choice to offer forgiveness to someone in a moment where your mind just screams that it is completely illogical to let go of the pain.
Wow.
Maybe forgiveness gives you a headache because the sheer unconditional grace required to execute it is simply too massive to fit into the tiny, logical hole of human fairness.